The idea that an empath just wakes up one day and decides to vanish is a complete illusion. To the outside observer, it looks like a sudden fracture, but internally, it is the final grain of sand that breaks the scales. You have to understand that an empath's sensitivity isn't a flaw or a softness that makes them easy to break. It is a high-functioning, always-on perceptual system. They are constantly scanning the emotional frequency of the room and the people they love. When they interact with you, they aren't just processing the sentences coming out of your mouth. They are simultaneously decoding your micro-expressions, the subtle shifts in your tone, and the hidden intentions behind your silence. They see the gaps where your words don't match your energy, and they feel the friction of your dishonesty long before you even realize you're being inconsistent. When you invalidate an empath by telling them they're overreacting, being too sensitive, or imagining things, you are doing something much more destructive than just winning a petty argument. You are effectively attacking the very navigation system they use to connect with the world. Imagine someone constantly telling you that the ground beneath your feet isn't actually there, even though you can feel it. That is what invalidation feels like to an empath. It creates a violent form of internal static. They use their intuition to build trust, and when you dismiss that intuition, you aren't just disagreeing with their opinion, you are dismantling the mechanism they use to feel safe in your presence. You are telling them that their primary way of experiencing life is wrong, and that creates a psychological wound that no amount of superficial apologies can fix. Because empaths are naturally wired for repair and harmony, they don't just walk away at the first sign of this friction. In fact, they do the exact opposite. They work overtime to fix a problem they didn't create. This is the stage of the relationship where the empath becomes an emotional architect. They will try to explain their feelings with more precision, hoping that if they just find the right words, you will finally get it. They will soften their delivery, lower their guard, and even go so far as to gaslight themselves on your behalf. They will sit in the quiet and wonder if maybe they are the problem, if maybe they are too sensitive. They are trying to fix the glitch in the connection because they value the bond more than their own comfort. This isn't weakness, it's a massive investment of emotional labor. They are giving you 1,000 micro chances to meet them halfway, most of which you probably don't even notice. The departure only happens when the cost of staying finally outweighs the fear of leaving. After months or years of having their reality dismissed, the empath hits a wall of pure exhaustion. They realize that to keep the relationship, they have to sacrifice their own sanity. They have to agree to live in a world where their feelings don't matter and their perceptions are treated as inconveniences. Once an empath recognizes that you are no longer a safe harbor for their truth, a switch flips. The internal static goes quiet and they stop trying to build the bridge. They don't leave suddenly. They leave because they have finally run out of ways to justify staying. By the time they actually walk out the door, they have already mourned the relationship in private for a very long time. They aren't leaving on an impulse. They are leaving because they've finally chosen to believe themselves over your denials. The silent recalibration is the most dangerous phase of a relationship with an empath, primarily because it is so quiet that most people mistake it for peace. When an empath realizes that their voice no longer carries weight and their feelings are being consistently brushed aside, they undergo a massive internal shift. They stop the exhausting cycle of explaining, defending, and pleading for understanding. To you, it might feel like the arguments have finally stopped and things are getting back to normal, but in reality, the empath has moved from the role of a participant to the role of an observer. They have entered a psychological observation phase where they are no longer trying to change your mind. They are simply watching to see who you actually are when they aren't there to fix you. This transition is not about being passive-aggressive or playing games. It is a survival mechanism. Because their previous attempts at communication were met with dismissal or invalidation, they begin to test the foundation of the relationship by doing nothing. They stop providing the emotional glue that holds everything together. They want to see if you will notice their silence, if you will step up to fill the gap, or if the relationship only functions when they are doing all the heavy lifting. While you might perceive this as them being distant, moody, or checked out, they are actually performing a high-stakes calculation. They are tallying up the instances of neglect and the moments of inconsistency. Every time you ignore their needs or prioritize your own ego over the connection, they are quietly adding a new data point to a growing conclusion that this environment is no longer a safe place for them to exist. As this recalibration deepens, the empath begins to label the space as emotionally unsafe. This is a definitive turning point. For an empath, safety isn't just about the absence of conflict. It's about the presence of genuine connection and mutual respect. Once they realize that sharing their inner world only leads to pain or mockery, they start withdrawing access. This is the most relatable yet misunderstood part of the process. They aren't being cold or unfeeling out of spite. They are simply pulling their energy back into themselves because they can no longer afford to waste it on someone who doesn't value it. They are protecting the core of their soul, which has been bruised by repeated rejection. They become a polite stranger within the relationship, answering questions, performing daily routines, and appearing present while their heart has already moved miles away. The tragedy of this phase is that by the time you realize something is wrong, the empath has already reached a definitive conclusion. They have spent weeks or months in this quiet observation mode, watching the patterns repeat without interruption. They have watched you choose yourself over the relationship time and time again, and they have finally accepted that you aren't going to change because you don't think you have to. This period of silence is actually the sound of an empath grieving. They are mourning the person they thought you were and the future they thought you'd have. By the time they finally speak up to end things, there is no anger left, only a calm, cold clarity. They haven't changed overnight. They have simply finished the long, lonely process of detaching from a person who made them feel like they had to shrink just to be loved. The concept of one-sided energy is the silent killer of relationships involving an empath, and it usually starts with the best of intentions. You have to understand that for an empath, giving isn't a calculated move, it's their default setting. They are wired to sense your stress, your unspoken anxieties, and your shifting moods long before you even realize you're feeling them. Because they can feel your discomfort as if it were their own, they instinctively move to fix it. They become the person who listens for hours, the one who anticipates your needs before you ask, and the one who consistently provides a soft place for you to land. In their mind, they aren't doing a favor. They are investing in a connection. They, snorts, believe that by pouring their heart into you, they are building a mutual reservoir of love and support that both of you can eventually draw from. The danger begins when this natural generosity transforms into a trap. In many dynamics, the other person becomes emotionally lazy without even realizing it. They get used to the empath doing all the heavy lifting. They stop checking in, they stop reciprocating, and they start taking the empath's presence for granted. It's like a bank account where one person is making massive deposits every single day while the other person is only making withdrawals. Because empaths don't naturally keep a scorecard or view love as a transaction, they will allow this imbalance to continue for an alarmingly long time. They tell themselves that their partner is just going through a hard phase or that they simply have more capacity to give. But while the mind is busy making excuses, the empath's body is quietly keeping the receipts. Every ignored text, every dismissed feeling, and every night spent supporting a partner who never asks, "How are you?" is recorded in their nervous system. Eventually, the empath hits a wall that no amount of kindness can climb over. The wall of unreciprocated exhaustion. This isn't just a physical tiredness. It's a soul-deep fatigue that comes from constantly pouring into a vessel that has a leak at the bottom. They wake up one day and realize that the relationship isn't a partnership. It's a project. They see that they have been acting as the sole architect, builder, and maintenance crew for the emotional infrastructure of the bond. They are the ones initiating the deep conversations, the ones planning the quality time, and the ones making the compromises. The realization hits like a ton of bricks. If they were to stop putting in the effort for even 48 hours, the entire relationship would likely collapse under its own weight because the other person has completely forgotten how to contribute. This realization brings a terrifying level of clarity. The empath stops seeing their partner's lack of effort as a mistake and starts seeing it as a choice. They recognize that the connection they valued so much only exists because they are over-functioning, effectively doing the work of two people to keep one relationship alive. The moment an empath truly sees this dynamic for what it is, the giving switch in their heart flips to the off position. It's not that they become mean or vindictive. It's that they simply run out of fuel. They recognize that by continuing to give, they are participating in their own destruction. They finally understand that you cannot sustain a fire with someone who is only interested in the warmth, but refuses to bring any wood to the flame. When an empath stops pouring, it's not a negotiation tactic. It's a final acknowledgement that they have been starving themselves to keep you full, and they aren't willing to die of emotional hunger anymore. For an empath, trust is not a luxury or a bonus feature of relationship. It is the very foundation upon which everything else is built. However, their definition of trust is different from most. They don't care about grand cinematic promises or expensive gifts that are meant to prove your love. What they crave and what they fundamentally need to survive in a connection is predictability. They need to know that the person they see today is the same person they will see tomorrow. They need your actions to align with your words with absolute precision. When an empath hears you say, "I love you," but then experiences you being cold, dismissive, or emotionally unavailable, it creates a violent clash in their reality. This misalignment is more than just a minor annoyance. It's a psychological trauma that forces their brain to work overtime just to make sense of the person standing in front of them. When you send mixed signals, you are placing an unbearable cognitive load on the empath's shoulders. Because they are naturally wired to seek harmony and truth, they cannot simply ignore the fact that you are acting differently than you are speaking. They begin to live in a state of constant translation. They spend their days analyzing your texts, your tone of voice, and your body language, trying to figure out which version of you is the real one. Are you the warm, loving partner from Monday morning, or are you the distant, irritable person from Tuesday night? This constant back and forth keeps the empath in a state of high alert. Their nervous system never gets a chance to rest because they are always bracing for the next shift in your mood. You might think you're just having a bad day, but to the empath, you are shaking the very ground they stand on, making it impossible for them to feel secure or grounded in the connection. The reason empaths stay in these inconsistent dynamics much longer than the average person is actually quite tragic. They're trying to solve you because they see the potential in people and have a deep capacity for understanding. They convince themselves that if they just look a little closer or try a little harder, they will find the reason for your inconsistency. They treat your mixed signals like a puzzle that needs to be finished. They think, if I can just figure out why they're acting this way, I can help them fix it. They stay because they're waiting for the warm version of you to return and stay for good. They give you the benefit of the doubt 1,000 times over, assuming that the confusion is just a byproduct of your own stress or past wounds. They become investigators of your behavior, sacrificing their own peace of mind to find a justification for why you aren't showing up for them. Eventually, however, the empath reaches a breaking point where the light finally turns on. They stop looking for excuses and start looking at the evidence. They realize that the confusion they've been feeling isn't an accident or a temporary phase. It is the actual design of the relationship. They understand that the inconsistency is a tool you are using, whether consciously or not, to keep them off balance and under your control. The moment they realize that you are perfectly capable of being consistent but simply choose not to be, the puzzle is solved and the interest vanishes. They don't leave because they finally lost their temper or because they want to hurt you. They leave because they are exhausted. They are tired of the mental gymnastics, tired of the second guessing, and tired of translating your maybe into a yes. They choose to walk away not out of spite, but out of a desperate need for a reality that actually makes sense. The final exit of an empath is not a move made out of anger, but a move made out of necessity. It all converges on one single, non-negotiable requirement: emotional safety. You have to understand that an empath's threshold for shared pain is incredibly high. They can sit with you through your darkest traumas. They can forgive your loudest mistakes. And they can hold space for your deepest insecurities without ever flinching. They are built to handle the hard stuff. But what they cannot and will not handle indefinitely is your instability. When your presence becomes a source of constant turbulence rather than a place of rest, you have compromised the only thing that keeps them tethered to you. For an empath, a relationship is supposed to be a sanctuary, a place where they can finally lower their guard. When that sanctuary turns into a battlefield or a house of mirrors, their very survival depends on leaving it. This shift is rooted in the body as much as the mind. Over time, the empath's nervous system begins to keep a record of every time they felt small, ignored, or blindsided by your behavior. Eventually, a biological tipping point is reached. Their body stops associating you with love and starts associating you with a threat response. Every time they see your name on their phone or hear your key in the lock, instead of feeling a sense of warmth, they feel a subtle tightening in their chest or a knot in their stomach. Once an empath's body registers you as a source of chronic stress rather than a source of peace, the connection is effectively dead. They can no longer think their way back into loving you because their own physiology is screaming at them to get away. This is the moment they stop asking the outward-facing question, "How do I make this work?" and start asking the inward-facing question, "What is this relationship doing to the person I am becoming?" The reason their departure feels so sudden and cold to you is that you are only seeing the final act of a very long, very painful play. By the time an empath actually packs a bag or says, "It's over," they have already spent months, maybe even years, mourning you while they were still sleeping in the same bed as you. They have already cried all their tears, played out every what-if scenario, and exhausted every possible excuse for your behavior. They have done the heavy lifting of grieving the loss of the relationship while they were still physically present. This is why when they finally walk away, they don't look back with regret. They aren't leaving to teach you a lesson, to get a reaction out of you, or to win a breakup. They are leaving because they have finally reached the end of their emotional rope and realize that there is nothing left to save. Ultimately, an empath's final exit is an act of profound self-respect. They have reached the sober conclusion that being alone is infinitely better than being lonely in a room with someone who makes them feel invisible. They realize that the peace they were trying to create with you was actually a war they were fighting against themselves. They choose solitude not because they hate you, but because they have finally started to love themselves enough to stop tolerating an environment that was quietly breaking them. They are choosing a life where they don't have to manage someone else's moods just to feel okay. When an empath leaves, they are reclaiming their energy, their sanity, and their right to a life that feels safe. They would rather face the silence of an empty house than the deafening noise of a relationship that demands they disappear just to keep the peace.